Anaya Mukherjee was just a girl. Young, full of life, standing at the edge of a future brimming with promise. Her laughter once echoed through the narrow streets of her village, where the scent of fresh chai and warm bread filled the morning air. She loved to dance during festivals, twirling in colors as the drums of celebration pounded in rhythm with her heart. She dreamed of becoming a dancer, of performing on grand stages, expressing herself through movement, and captivating audiences with her passion. But in a single night, that dream was stolen. It wasn't just stolen, it was shattered. Torn apart by the hands of those she once walked past every day. Faces she recognized, voices she had once greeted. They took more than her innocence. They tried to take her spirit. But she fought back. She did what so many before her could not. She spoke. She named them. She demanded justice. And for that, they came for her again. The last time the world saw her, she was wrapped in flames. But her voice did not falter. With her final breaths, she whispered their names once more. A girl turned into a martyr. A whisper turned into a battle cry. The world would know her story. And now, so will you. Welcome to the Crime Series. I am glad to have you join us on another video. Kindly subscribe, like, and share. Let me know where you are watching from. Kolkata, the heart of West Bengal, was a city of contrasts, where history and modernity intertwined on every street corner. Once the capital of British India, it now pulsed with the energy of millions, from scholars and poets to street vendors and daily wage workers. The air carried the scent of fresh chai and frying samosas, blending with the distant honking of yellow taxis and the rhythmic clang of trams. It was a city that never truly slept, yet beneath its cultural richness lay an undercurrent of unease. While communities thrived in close-knit harmony, crime had woven itself into the fabric of daily life. Petty thefts in crowded markets, whispered stories of missing girls, and a justice system that often turned a blind eye. For most, life moved on, unbothered. But for a young girl with dreams bigger than the narrow lanes she walked, the city's shadows held dangers she had yet to see. Anaya had always been different. Not in a way that set her apart, but in a way that made her shine. While many around her spoke of settling down early, she dreamed of dancing. Her passion for dance ran deep. Every beat, every movement, every twirl spoke to her soul. She loved the way dance connected her with tradition, how it allowed her to express emotions words couldn't capture. She dreamed of one day performing on grand stages, her body telling stories through graceful, yet powerful, movements. Anaya's family lived a simple, hard-working life. Her mother, a petty trader, sold goods in the local market, earning just enough to provide for her children. Anaya's father worked as a taxi driver. Anaya had younger siblings, and though their life wasn't easy, there was always a sense of love and unity in their home. Despite their struggles, they supported each other, dreaming of better days. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Mukherjee, though of humble means, believed in her. They worked tirelessly, not for themselves but for her future. Her father often said, "You will go further than any of us ever have." And she believed him. But Kolkata, despite its charm and culture, held dangers for girls like her. Whispers carried warnings, of eyes that lingered too long, of footsteps that followed too closely, of promises that led to ruin. Still, Anaya held on to hope, unaware that fate had already drawn its own cruel boundaries around her. And soon, those invisible lines would begin to close in. October 25th was like any other evening in Kolkata. The city moved at its usual pace. Street vendors calling out last-minute offers, small roadside tea stalls filled with locals winding down after a long day, and the occasional tram rattling along its tracks. The air was thick with the scent of spices, exhaust fumes, and the lingering warmth of the day's sun. Anaya Mukherjee had spent the afternoon at dance practice, perfecting routines for an upcoming performance. Dance was her sanctuary, a place where she could express herself freely, away from the pressures of the world. By the time she left, the sky had dimmed into twilight. She packed her things and hurried home, knowing her parents would be expecting her. Her route was familiar. She had walked that path countless times, past the temple where incense always hung in the air, past the sweet vendors with trays of jalebis, past the worn-out shop fronts that defined her neighborhood. But something about that night felt off. The streets felt heavier, quieter, as if something invisible hovered nearby. Then, as she turned a corner, she heard her name. She looked back. Standing there were boys she had known for years, neighbors, classmates, familiar faces from the same community. At first, she didn't feel threatened. They smiled, asked how dance practice had gone, chatted casually about her family. It felt harmless, but quickly their tone changed. Their smiles faded, their questions became intrusive, their voices more urgent. "Come with us," one of them said. "Just for a minute." Anaya hesitated. It was getting late. She needed to go home. But before she could walk away, they closed in. The friendly chatter turned into a trap. Surrounded, overpowered, and frightened, she was dragged into a dark alleyway, away from the lights, away from help, and away from the world she knew. What followed was a brutal betrayal. These weren't strangers. They were people she had once trusted. They used that trust to destroy her sense of safety, of self. When they left, she was broken in more ways than one. But Anaya didn't stay silent. With remarkable courage, she told her parents everything. Every painful detail of what had happened. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was clear. Her parents, heartbroken and enraged, immediately reported the assault to the police. They believed in justice. They believed the system would protect their daughter. At the station, the officers listened, took notes, and nodded. Their words were kind, their faces sympathetic. They promised action. But something was missing. The urgency wasn't there. Days passed. No arrests, no follow-up calls. No one came to check on Anaya. The initial warmth had turned cold. The family's hope began to slip into quiet despair. Still shaken, but trying to return to normalcy, Anaya stayed home while her parents went to work the next morning. She believed the worst was behind her. She believed speaking up would protect her. She was wrong. That afternoon, as she walked through a quiet stretch near her home, they came again. The same boys. This time, there were no masks, no fake smiles, only rage. "You think you can go to the police?" one of them spat. "You think you can ruin us?" Before she could scream, they dragged her into another alley. But this time, it wasn't just about control. It was revenge. They assaulted her again, more violently, more cruelly. Before they left, they delivered a chilling warning. If she or her family dared to pursue the case any further, there would be worse consequences. When Anaya returned home, barely able to walk, her body bruised and soul crushed, her parents found her at the door, shattered. It was a scene no parent should ever witness. Their cries echoed through the walls. Their faith in justice had been turned into a second weapon against their daughter. The very act of seeking help had triggered a second nightmare. The second assault left her more shattered than the first, not just physically, but emotionally. Her sense of safety, already broken after the first attack, was now completely destroyed. She had hoped that speaking up would bring protection, that the police would act swiftly to find the men who had hurt her. But that hope had been crushed. The system had failed her. Her family, already disillusioned by the police's lack of action, now saw the depth of their failure. But this was only the beginning of a much larger struggle, one that would test her strength, her family's resolve, and their belief in the justice system. They could no longer rely on others to protect her. The fight for her life and for justice was far from over. Her parents, still reeling from the horror of what had happened to their daughter, now found themselves in a battle not just against the attackers, but against the very system that was supposed to protect them. They returned to the police station, demanding justice. But the response they received was frustratingly familiar. The officers seemed indifferent, treating the case with the same level of concern as any minor incident. There was no urgency, no follow-up. The investigation, it seemed, was still at a standstill. The news of the second attack spread through the community, igniting a firestorm of anger and disbelief. People began to question how this could have happened in a city like Kolkata, known for its rich cultural heritage and warm hospitality. How could such brutality go unpunished? People looked over their shoulders more, locked their doors earlier, and whispered about what had happened to the young woman who had tried to seek justice. The fear spread beyond her family and her attackers. It seeped into the streets, into homes, as women across the city began to wonder, could this happen to me? Her case became a symbol of systemic failure, of injustice, and of the vulnerability women face. Yet, despite the widespread outrage, it became clear that the wheels of justice turned slowly, if at all. Her attackers, knowing that the police had yet to take decisive action, grew bolder. No one could understand the delay. Was it a backlog of cases, an overwhelmed system, or had rape become such a common tragedy that it barely stirred urgency anymore? Whispers spread through the community, questioning if justice had lost its meaning. Meanwhile, with the entire neighborhood now aware of what had happened and the identities of the attackers no longer a secret, they went into hiding. Yet, even from the shadows, their threats persisted. Someone, perhaps an accomplice, perhaps one of them, managed to send chilling warnings to Anaya Mukherjee and her family. The message was clear. They should have stayed silent. If they pushed any further, if they escalated this beyond what it already was, their entire household would pay the price. Her parents, desperate for answers, refused to stay silent. If the police wouldn't act, perhaps the power of public scrutiny would force their hand. They reached out to local journalists, hoping that media attention would turn whispers of injustice into a roar too loud to ignore. The story of Anaya Mukherjee, a young woman betrayed by those she once trusted, spread beyond their neighborhood. It wasn't just another crime. It was a glaring failure of the system, a reminder of how easily the vulnerable could be silenced. With every retelling, the outrage grew. This wasn't just about what had been done to her. It was about what hadn't been done to stop it. The months after the second attack were an unbearable blur of silence and tension. Anaya Mukherjee, once full of life and dance, became a shadow of herself. The vibrant girl who had once twirled through Kolkata's streets, laughing with friends, now withdrew into isolation. Each passing day felt heavier than the last. The police had not acted swiftly. Her attackers still roamed free, and the fear of retaliation clung to her like a second skin. The threats never stopped. Somehow, even as the assailants went into hiding, their presence loomed over her family. Anonymous messages found their way to them, warning them to drop the case. Some were whispered threats passed through the neighborhood. Others came in the form of glares from those who sympathized with the attackers. The words were always the same: stay quiet or suffer the consequences. For Anaya, safety was no longer a feeling she could hold on to. She stopped stepping outside unless absolutely necessary. The stares from people on the street made her skin crawl. Were they looking at her with pity, with judgment? Or worse, were some silently siding with her abusers? She no longer knew who to trust. Depression settled in, suffocating her spirit. The dream she once held so dearly felt distant, almost foolish. The girl who had danced so freely now barely moved from her room. Her mother would find her staring at the walls for hours, lost in a world where hope had been stripped away. Justice felt like an illusion. Something dangled just out of reach, something meant for others, but never for her. December 23, 2014, began like any other day for Anaya Mukherjee. Alone in her family's compound in Kolkata, the silence of the house was almost deafening. Outside, the city buzzed with the hum of the holiday season: car horns, voices, distant fireworks. But inside, Anaya felt no joy. Her world had been overshadowed by fear for months, ever since she had dared to speak out against the men who had assaulted her. Threats had followed, warnings had come, and yet justice had not. Anaya lived each day like a prisoner, trapped within the very home that was meant to protect her. The fear gnawed at her constantly, a quiet torment that never truly faded. Then, on that fateful afternoon, the terror she had long anticipated came to life. Two men arrived at her doorstep, associates of the very attackers who had tried to break her spirit. Their presence alone was enough to chill the air. Her parents had spoken of them in whispers, warning her to be vigilant. Now they stood before her, sent to ensure her silence. What followed was chaos. Neighbors would later recall hearing raised voices from within the compound, followed by a piercing scream that tore through the air. It was a cry of terror, of desperation, a sound that would haunt the neighborhood for years. There was no escape. In a moment of unimaginable horror, they set her alight. Flames erupted, consuming everything in its path. Her screams, filled with agony and defiance, rang out across the street. Some bystanders, frozen in shock, believed she had done it to herself, perhaps in a final bid to escape the torment. But that wasn't the truth. In her final conscious moments, Anaya shouted the names of her attackers, the names she had been forced to keep hidden for so long. It was her last act of bravery, a desperate plea for justice, even as her body was engulfed in fire. Burned over 65% of her body, Anaya somehow survived the initial attack. Charred and in unimaginable pain, she stumbled out of the house. Her clothes had turned to ash. Her skin, blackened and blistered, bore witness to the savagery she had endured. She collapsed on the street, barely alive. Passers-by rushed to help, horrified by the sight before them. She was rushed to the hospital, clinging to life. The public response was immediate and furious. News of the attack spread rapidly. The media swarmed the hospital. Outrage erupted on the streets of Kolkata and beyond. Protesters demanded accountability, not only from the perpetrators, but from a system that had failed to protect Anaya despite her repeated cries for help. Anaya's story struck a nerve. She became a symbol of every woman who had ever been silenced, ignored, or abandoned by those meant to protect her. Her suffering reflected a deeper, systemic rot that had allowed such violence to go unchecked. Under growing public pressure, the police finally acted. 6 men were arrested, their faces broadcast across national news channels. For many, it was a long overdue step toward justice. But for Anaya, it had come too late. The damage was already done, her body broken, her spirit dimming with each passing hour. The arrests were a start, but the real battle had only just begun. As Anaya lay in critical condition, the road ahead was uncertain. The legal process would be long and painful. Her family, already shattered, now faced the uphill task of fighting for a conviction. And while the arrests offered a sliver of hope, they could never erase the trauma that had already been carved into Anaya's life. A week later, Anaya succumbed to her injuries. The doctors had confirmed her death and had also confirmed that she had been pregnant. There would be no miracle, no reprieve. The girl who had once danced in the streets, whose laughter had been a symbol of hope, was gone. Her death marked the end of her fight, but it ignited a fire in the hearts of many. The outrage surrounding her death prompted a fierce debate on the justice system, the handling of sexual assault cases, and the need for harsher punishments for offenders. Anaya's family were shattered by her loss. Her story, her suffering was everywhere. It was in every news report, every headline, every social media post. Journalists and reporters from across the nation flocked to Kolkata, desperate to cover the unfolding story. But not all were interested in the truth. Some journalists arrived to chase the headlines, more focused on the sensationalism of the story than the justice for the victim. The real journalists, however, dug deeper. They uncovered the details, interviewed the witnesses, and demanded transparency from the police, forcing the issue into the public eye. The family's pain was only compounded by the actions of the police. Allegedly, the officers attempted to cover up the crimes, further adding to the grief of the grieving family. After Anaya's body was released from the hospital, the authorities took an unprecedented step, seizing her remains in what they claimed was an attempt to help the family during their difficult time. The police wanted to take her body for cremation against the family's wishes, an action that ignited a street brawl outside the mortuary. Protesters, furious at the insensitivity of the authorities, tried to block the police from taking the body, demanding that it be allowed to stay so that the family could mourn their daughter with the dignity she deserved. The chaotic scene shocked the people of Kolkata and stirred widespread outrage across the state. A filmmaker who had been a vocal supporter of women's rights described herself as devastated by the events that unfolded. Despite the police's attempt to hastily dispose of the body, the family fought to ensure that their daughter's remains would be treated with respect. Eventually, the cremation was allowed with the family's consent, and Anaya was laid to rest, but the damage to the justice system was done. But the horror did not end with Anaya's death. As her grieving family tried to cope with the unbearable loss, they faced yet another blow. Anaya's father, a humble taxi driver, reported that he had been threatened by the very people who were supposed to protect him. Police officers allegedly pressured him to leave the state, warning that his taxi permit would be revoked and his livelihood destroyed if he refused. The revelation sparked renewed outrage. It was no longer just about a heinous crime. It was about a system designed to silence the victims and protect the powerful. Once again, the police were viewed not as defenders of justice, but as enablers of oppression. The case moved into the courts, but the fire in the streets had already been lit. Public fury exploded as Anaya's story captured national attention. The demand for swift justice grew louder, calling for the maximum punishment for the perpetrators. On January 15th, a fast-track court began proceedings against the 6 accused men. Among them were Subhojit Sen, Bikram Pal, Tanmoy Das, Arjun Ghosh, and Sandeep Chatterjee, all charged with kidnapping, gang rape, and criminal conspiracy. A 6th man, who testified against the others, was acquitted by the court. Each of the 5 convicted received 20 years of rigorous imprisonment and a fine of 5,000 rupees. Failure to pay the fine would result in an additional year behind bars. Yet for many, the punishment still felt hollow. No sentence could ever undo the pain inflicted on Anaya or her family. Adding another devastating layer to the tragedy, forensic reports were ordered to determine if Anaya had been pregnant as a result of the repeated assaults. The uncertainty only deepened the collective grief and fueled public anger. For many, Anaya's case symbolized the deep-rooted failures of the justice system. The young woman, brave enough to speak up, had been abandoned by the very institutions meant to protect her. Her murder was not just a personal tragedy, it was a national indictment. But even in death, Anaya's voice could not be silenced. Her name became a rallying cry for thousands who had suffered in silence. Her fight, though cut short, sparked something larger, a movement that challenged the status quo and demanded accountability. Her story became more than just a case. It became a cause. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or opened your eyes, subscribe to our channel for more real-life crime documentaries and fictional stories inspired by true events. We uncover the darkest corners of human nature so you can be more aware, more informed, and maybe even safer. Until next time, stay sharp, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something just isn't right.
A family in Kolkata, India is in mourning after the death of their daughter. They say she died after being gang raped twice and burned alive.
According to the family, the victim was 16 and gang raped twice in October. The second time was when she was on her way back from the police station after filing a complaint about the first attack.
Died December 31st from third-degree burns over 65% of her body, and she was pregnant. The International Business Times reports police have admitted the burns came from 2 men setting the girl on fire. Reports at first she had attempted suicide, and according to reports she was set on fire. House December 23rd. Her family was angry. She was given no security after the rapes and accuses police for attempting to cover up much of what happened. Euronews reports her family accuses police of trying to have the teen's body cremated to cover up what happened in the case.